Hi everyone, my name's Ben Wells. I'm from Sydney, Chrome OS Sydney, where I'm an engineering manager working on Chrome OS apps platforms. And yeah, today I'm going to talk through, give you a high level overview of all of the apps platforms that we have on Chrome OS. So just a quick overview of what I'm going to talk about today. Um, I guess the theme of this talk is that Chrome OS has many apps platforms and it's really a meta platform. I'm going to go over all of the application platforms that Chrome OS has running at the moment. In particular, both to kind of go through the breadth of apps platforms, but also to talk through some of the legacy ones that exist and can be quite confusing. For each platform, I'll talk about what each of the platforms gives to users, give you a bit of a technical perspective of the apps platform, like how it works internally, um, and also talk about if you're building an app for Chrome OS, either because you're a third party and you want to have provide an application for our users through a store or on the web or however they would get it, or if you're an internal developer and you're building something like the camera, what kind of platform you should use to build your app. I just wanted to point out as well that hopefully there will be time for some questions at the end, and there should be, there's a link at the top of this where you can go and put your questions in if you have any. Okay, so let's jump in. So Chrome OS it's a very interesting operating system in the sense that it doesn't really have any native app platform, and by that I mean if you look at other application platforms like Linux, for example, developers can write code which runs, at the same kind of, they're programming at the same level as the operating system developers in a lot of ways. Chrome OS is highly sandboxed, so it doesn't have this kind of thing. In the beginning, Chrome OS was just Chrome with a few bit of little extras there to let you boot into it. If you want to see the history of Chrome OS, there's another talk at the moment that you can go and watch, which would walk through that. But the very first version of Chrome OS was just Chrome running in full screen on a computer. Became apparent to us pretty quickly that we needed more than this. There is an app gap. It was a real problem. There are applications that are missing. And it's also a bit of a perception thing. People would look at this and think, hey, it's just a browser. I want a real computer. And by that, they mean they want to run apps. Even though they were running Gmail, which is, an app for under many criteria, it was running in a browser tab and it didn't feel like an app. So we needed more. Initially, that resulted in the Chrome apps platform. That didn't really solve the problem, though. We still had application gaps. And so the solution to that was to be a meta platform, to actually host applications from other platforms on Chrome OS. Right. If you want an analogy of this, there's cartoons from popular fiction, pop culture, where you have superheroes and they're individually powerful, they're individually cool, they combine into a much greater whole. If this was an internal version of this presentation, I'd have a picture here indicating that. But anyway, moving on. Okay, so first, Chrome apps. This is a very confusing world. Chrome apps can refer to a number of things. So just to be clear, what I'll call them here is I'll call them kind of Webstore apps that you can install from the Chrome Webstore. The first two types of these that we introduced, we call them now legacy Webstore apps. They're very deprecated. You should not use these. The first type of these is legacy packaged apps, and the second type is a hosted app. Both of these are effectively websites, which either run locally, the packaged app, all of the assets are on the computer, so it will work offline, or they're really just a website. An example of these would be Gmail. The host is a hosted app. When you install the Gmail hosted app from the web store, it's kind of like adding a bookmark into your launcher, which lets you just run Gmail in a tab. Another example would be Docs. It's not a very good example. Originally, SSH was one of these as well, a legacy packaged app where all the assets would be live. It still pretty much just looked like a website. These are based on the extension system. What that means is if you've ever made an extension, they have manifest and icons. They come from, metadata and icons come from a manifest. They can have a background page to enable background processing. And hosted apps, you could use the extension system to pre-grant some web permissions. So if you're a developer and you're wondering about how to, you've got a great idea for an app that you want to make for Chrome OS, or you're an internal developer creating an experience, should you use one of these? No, definitely not. They're deprecated and going away. Then we have Chrome apps. These are also installed from the Webstore. Their official name is Chrome apps. These were kind of the culmination, I guess, of packaged apps and hosted apps. They are also known as platform apps or V2 packaged apps. This was a major effort by the Chrome team to create a more capable application platform using web technology, but not reliant on standardization for the APIs. So in effect, APIs could be created a lot faster. One of the goals of this was to try out new web APIs before going through the standardization path. We could, for example, we could see what a file system API would look like. And another goal was to create a platform for Chrome OS. This failed to get momentum. It's now deprecated on all platforms. And an example would be the text editor, which I believe still ships with Chrome OS by default. And there's a picture of it. These also use the extension system. They have a manifest for their metadata. They use web technology for implementation. They had a rich set of capabilities. So they had rich windowing APIs, rich networking, file system, serial, USB capabilities, access to all of your media. They had something called the sync file system API, which was pretty cool. You could have like a little file system which would synchronize to all of the computers that you had. So they were very capable. Should you use these? Again, no, these are deprecated. So even though you might be able to build a pretty good experience with one of these, you shouldn't use it for new projects. Just a quick note on extension APIs. The extension system, it's a powerful and flexible system. It has a rich allow list capability, so you can create an API and grant it to just one app or one extension or a very well-defined set of things. And using this capability, you can actually grant special powers to websites or to specific apps. We used this a lot in the early days of Chrome apps when we were building new APIs. We would, find a partner or a number of partners that we could, we could collaborate with, and they could try out the API and give us feedback, and we could iterate on it like that. There's a formal process to add and extend extension APIs. There's an extension API review process where proposals are made. You could think of it as kind of standardization light. So extension APIs are powerful, flexible. You can do a lot with them. Should you use them? I guess the answer is maybe. Sometimes it's the best way. If you are really trying to give special capabilities to particular web things, internal web things, Mojo is probably a better answer for you. All right, moving on to some of the more modern application platforms we've got in Chrome OS now. Android apps. I'm sure everyone's heard of Android apps. These slides are quite old, so I don't know what the current number is, but there are millions of Android apps out there in the world. Could be double that now for all I know. Loads of games, loads of entertainment apps, content consumption, social apps. And there's also apps in Android that aren't available on any other desktop platforms. For example, Snapchat, I believe, is not available outside of mobile. TikTok is on the web now, but it initially was only on Android and iOS as well. So these can now run on Chrome OS. They've been able to run for a while. I'm sure everyone knows that. Most apps should just work. However, some might need some attention applied to make them work well on desktop, to make them work well with large screens, make them work well with keyboard and mouse, making the window so it can resize, things like that, which don't happen on phones. Some apps might need adjustments so that they work well. The Android system is not always available on Chrome OS devices. Older devices won't have the latest Android system. In a lot of enterprises, they disable Android, and it's not typically enabled in education settings either. A good example of an Android app that runs on Chrome OS and is installed by default is Google Play Books. I had Google Play Music, but that's not a great example anymore. Android apps, giving some technical details, Android apps run in the Arc++ system. Arc++ is actually it's the second version that we've got for an Android runtime on Chrome OS. The first was just Arc. Arc, I believe, is still around, but it is also deprecated. Arc was a way where I think it was an emulated thing where you kind of had a part of it ran in a Chrome app container, a V2 packaged app container. Each app ran like that, and it had this big support library which provided the Android runtime. For whatever reason, that's now deprecated, and the new model is to actually run real Android inside a Linux container, which just works a lot better. Some super quick technical details, because I believe the talk after this will give you way more technical details than I could. They access the rest of the system through something called ArcBridge and Mojo, and they use Wayland, which is like a modern answer to X11 for their graphics stack. Should you use Android apps? Yes, please. You can create great experiences with Android apps on Chrome OS, and go for it. Totally supported technology. Okay. Moving right along. Web apps. So web apps it's a bit of a confusing name. We've got PWAs and just web apps generally. So for purposes of this talk, let's consider web apps as apps that have been added into your launcher, and so you can pin them to your shelf and you can run them from your launcher. On Chrome OS, these can be run either in windowed mode or in tabs. There's two types of web apps. A user can add a shortcut to a web app for any website that they're on. If there's good metadata, like icons, then we'll use those. The best way to add metadata for your web app is through the web manifest. And if the website provides great metadata, then this will be a pretty good experience. Then for apps that we think will work better and provide a more app-like experience, the main difference being that we think they will work with limited connectivity, which you could read as you'll never see the Chrome dyno in one of these. We class those as PWAs, which means progressive web apps, and they have kind of more affordances in the Chrome UI to be installed. An example of a non-PWA web app is Showtime, which is pre-installed on the Pixel Slate devices. Or, anyone can, if you want to try it, you can go and use Gmail in a window by getting into your Gmail app, going to the three-dot menu, and I think under More Tools, there's Create Shortcut. As I mentioned before, PWAs, progressive web apps, to qualify as a PWA, you need to work offline or with limited network connectivity, and you need to have good metadata. If your web app qualifies as a PWA, there's a few things you can do. One is that in the Omnibox next to the URL, a little install button will come out for your web app. The app itself can actually prompt for installation. Once the user engages with the site a little bit, the site then there's an API which enables the site to ask the user to install this app. And as of recently, you can now add these into the Play Store. I think it's not quite ready on Chrome OS yet, the support for user-added PWAs in the Play Store, but it will be pretty soon. Examples of PWAs: Canvas, which ships with Chrome OS devices, and Spotify, which you can see here running in its PWA window. Technically, under the hood, I mean, web apps, they're just websites, obviously. We need to have a system in Chrome OS to kind of register the installed web apps. And there's also a system to kind of run them in their own windows, etc. For a long time, we implemented installed web apps using the extension system. They're very similar to hosted apps in a lot of ways. So we kind of created a special, maybe hacked up version of hosted apps, which we call bookmark apps. We've just gone through a long project to kind of undo that hack. That took about 2 years, paying down some technical debt, and we've migrated off extensions now, and they have their own separate system, so there's no dependencies of the web apps system on Chrome apps or the extension system. That was the BMO project, and now we have a separate registry to track the installed apps and to do all the operating system integrations and windowing, etc., etc. Maybe something worth pointing out is that this is a pretty vibrant system. There's a lot of stuff happening. There's a lot of capabilities being added to the web app ecosystem by Chrome OS, by Chrome, by Microsoft. And we have good collaborations with those people. Should you use PWAs on web apps? Yes, definitely. They are well supported. Okay, moving on to some of the more fun platforms. We've got Christini, which is a Linux subsystem which runs on Chrome OS. This system's targeted at developer use cases. That's really what we intend it to be used for, is developers creating Android and web apps. We also support other things like Arduino development, etc. So any kind of software development. It's currently in beta, and we're working hard to get it out of beta. Enabling Linux, it only adds a terminal into your system. So if you go through settings and enable Linux, it downloads the stuff and you get a terminal. You can then install other apps using apt, or you can build them yourself, make them yourself. You can get dev files and use them. So technical knowledge is very much assumed for the Linux system. Right now, we don't have any plans to go beyond developers and target other more mainstream use cases. This is very much a developer-focused product. Technically, the Linux thing, it is a Debian Buster running inside a container, running inside a VM. And the VM provides the security boundary. Multiple containers within that one VM are supported by the system, but at the moment, there's only one primary container, which is kind of supported by the UI. So if you go through all of the UI, you get one container. If you really want, you can have multiple containers, but you need to use Crush to start them and to interact with them. The terminal itself is something called a system web app, which we'll get to. The other apps, for example, if you install GNOME Terminal, or if you install VS Code, for example, they use Wayland and Exo, just like Android, to communicate, to do their windowing and graphical output. And dbus is used for other communications. Should you, if you want to port your app to Chrome OS or bring your app to Chrome OS or create a new app, should you use this as your technology base? Probably not, is the answer. I mean, I'm not trying to cast shade on Christini. It's a great product, and my teams are helping to build it, so I use it a lot and I love it. But it's very much a niche thing targeted at developers. And if you want your app to be a mainstream app, you should use web technology or Android technology. Parallels is another application, or Windows is the application platform brought to you through Parallels. This is a fairly new thing that we're in the early launch phase at the moment. It's only for commercial customers. It runs in a VM. Apps or if you're from a user perspective, when you're using Parallels, you get one big window, which is your Windows desktop. And yeah, there's no deep operating system integrations at the app level. It's all at the VM level. If you're wanting to create an app for Chrome OS users, should you use Windows and Parallels? No, I think it's not something we expect all users of Chrome OS to have. And if you want to target the most users, you should use web or Android. Okay, they're all the kind of public application platforms which third-party developers can use to bring apps to Chrome OS. We also have some more esoteric things that we use to bring you system functionality. And these are called system apps. These apps, they're kind of built-in functionality provided by the system, and they have a lot of kind of highly privileged APIs and capabilities. There are a few different ways you can build apps like this. The deprecated way is to use Chrome apps. An example of a system app built as a Chrome app would be the Files app on Chrome OS. These types of Chrome apps, they're shipped on the system image, and they have kind of special APIs. So the file system has a file system private API, which it can use to, do the privileged things that it can do to the file system that not any old app can do. Should you use a Chrome app to provide system functionality for a new app which you might be about to build? No, it's generally something that we try not to use. You should use one of the next two things which are supported. Chrome apps deprecated. You can use C++ and the views layer, the views kind of widget toolkit. I actually only know of one example of an app which does this, and that would be the shortcut viewer, which you can get to by, I think it's Control-Alt ? Or some combination of the modifier keys and question mark will bring up the shortcut viewer. You can use C++ and views for apps, but we only recommend it for very, very simple UIs, just because the toolkit isn't as rich as the web. And it's also not as optimized for things like complex animations as the web is. New system apps that we're building are built using something called system web apps. Examples of system web apps would be the operating system settings app, terminal, Explore, which is the new help app, and there's more coming. These are basically web apps which are hosted on the system image. They have you can learn more details later today. There's a talk from one of my colleagues, Gio, who's going through some of the details of system web apps. This is totally recommended technology, and this is the preferred way if you want to bring a new app providing system functionality to Chrome OS. Okay, so wow, finishing early. This is good, on time. So just to summarize, and by the way, don't forget you can add questions, ask questions using the link at the top. So yeah, just to summarize the app gap, it has been in the past a weakness of Chrome OS, and we've been working really hard on filling the app gap. And I'm quite positive at the moment and quite confident that we don't really have an app gap problem. Now we've got kind of an app surplus, and I think this is a strength of Chrome OS, just the breadth of apps that can be run through a variety of means. Okay, so we've got 6 minutes. Just have a drink, and there's one question in the Slido. Please add more if you have any. Okay. First question, first and only question so far. With phones being mainstream, how many people are actually using Chrome OS apps? How do we get more devs to prioritize app development for Chrome OS? That's a good question. This is kind of the story of Chrome OS, which I think we're turning around because usage is growing quite rapidly of Chrome OS. But if you go back in time, the problem we had was this chicken and egg problem of we want developers to create apps for Chrome OS, but we didn't have a large user base, so it wasn't attractive to developers. That is changing, and we numbers are growing, but we still have that problem. If you look at Android, for example, if you're building an Android app, you'll be thinking phones primarily. So how do we get developers to make the changes to make their app work really well on Chrome OS? I think the answer here is to really focus on the opportunities we can give, because I think Chrome OS, it is a bit of a greenfield. And if you do add the extra code that you need to spend that little bit of extra effort making your Android app work really well, or creating a PWA and getting it into the store, there's a market there on Chrome OS for you. I think what we as Chrome OS need to do is to really make it so that we, I guess, steer users more towards these apps which work really well. And I think if we can do that, then it becomes, we're incentivizing developers better to actually spend the effort to make their apps work well on Chrome OS. Question number 2, why Linux apps can't run natively in Chrome OS? Why only through Crostini? Super easy question, I guess. For security, the VM we have provides a very strong sandbox around any Linux apps. And yeah, if we made it so that developers could use apps directly into the system, we do have the mini jail, so I guess we could try and sandbox them, but we don't view that as providing a strong enough security boundary. So the VM lets us meet the goals of this technology, which is to empower developers to use Chrome OS to develop software without compromising security. Okay. Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure talking to you all. I hope it was useful, and yeah, goodbye.